I'm Norm. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and it's great to be here. Thank you for the nice welcome. And so I'm going to talk about the experience that I got through the big book and the spiritual experience that came as a result of doing this work. And in the big book, the basic text from page 1 to 164 has remained unchanged, and because this is the AA message. So the question that I have to ask myself, or we have to ask ourselves, is, what is the message that we're carrying to the addict that still suffers? And what is this message doing, and why do I need this message for my life if I'm a real addict dying from untreated addiction? Why do I have to do the work? Why can't I just, I don't know, work out a lot? Or why can't I get a good tan or find me a good spouse to take care and take me out of my addiction? Get me out of hell and set me on a path to freedom. Why do I need any of this work in the big book? Why do I even need this book? What messages am I getting to get to God? Which is why I need this book. It's information which is going to take me to God, to the God of my understanding, and that God is going to set me free. And a lot of us take different paths, and it's about getting right, getting my experience right with God to set me free, and He's going to do this for me. I heard it best by someone who said, a farmer plants plants and makes the ground fertile, and God does the growing. A doctor performs the surgery, and God does the healing. I need to show up with a spirit of willingness, willing to do anything, to go to any length by any lengths is, it means different things to me over the past 14 years, but it was any lengths because the circumstances brought me to a place of, I will do anything. When that question was posed to me by my sponsor, will you go to any lengths to recover? I said, yeah. What were my alternatives? There were no more lurking notions, no reservations of any kind in me that maybe I can just squeeze through again. I knew it was over. My next trip was to get to God by any means necessary, and the path is in the book, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it had a clear-cut and precise path to God. I mean, that's what this is about, right? Giving this information, getting awake from this God, and then going to another addict who's dying, who's blocked, and giving them this information so that they can find this path and they can get right with their God and go back into the fellowship. And this is what happens. Lives are being saved, and we're taking them through this book. And one of the most powerful sentences in our big book, it's just a simple few words: lack of power. That was our dilemma. Lack of power, and we have found it is not only with alcohol, it is lack of power across the board with everything. We access power and then we are suddenly not powerless anymore, are we? We have the power to do great things, like pulling a drunk out of hell. Like pulling a drunk out of hell and helping them get recovered. Not recovering, recovered. Could you imagine doing this, a day at a time, just hanging on a day at a time? Dr. Bob made a statement, and he says, I quit drinking for good and all. I quit drinking for good and all. That's forever. And the chapter to the agnostics talks about quitting altogether, and that's forever. We get recovered. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. We get this awakening on this path, and we don't get free room and board in step 10. What we do is continue to seek new experiences with this power. So what brings me to this power? These steps. Why do I show up? Because circumstances getting me here brought me to a place of willingness to go to any lengths. There are great things. There's great things that happen on the other side. It talks about we are building an arch with which We pass through a free man or woman. It's not pleasant going through the arch. There is a squeezing that goes on, and it's not comfortable. But my sponsor says going through this work again, are you ready? When he said this, to do this again, he said, are you ready to have your entire life turned upside down on you? A complete overhaul. And after 14 years, I remember when I approached this guy, we talked about reemergence of ego in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't so sure, but he said things are uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that I'm ready to go through this complete revolutionary change again. But something deep down in here, that quiet voice, which is usually God, is saying, just trust this, man, and follow the path. This loud voice up here is saying, you don't really need to do this, right? See, one of the things that happens in AA is this, and it's been my experience and watching the experience of others, is that we become a prey to comfortability, a prey to comfortability. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're around here for a little while. We start to sponsor people. The wife lets us back in the room, in the bedroom. The dog isn't barking at us when we come in, and we get employed. And when guys get new, they get their new sneakers, and the girls get new hairdos and manicures. And that's how come they're new in AA. So that stuff starts to happen. We start to sponsor people, and we still have a sponsor, maybe a sponsor who's popular, or we know where the coffee machine is, where the bathroom is. We're greeting, or we're getting into this thing, and things get good. We go through this work. Things get good. And then the illness says, you're doing good. Why don't you just kick back, right? And our book is really clear on resting on our laurels. Things get comfortable, and that can be a downfall, and we become prey to our comfortability. Why? Because we stopped writing inventory. We stopped prayer and meditation. Well, you know what? Hey, John will get that newcomer, or Vicky will get that new person because, I'm tired. I want to go home. I don't want to stick around. And I'm forgetting what it was like when I walked in the door, looking for someone to help me, and how important it was for me when I was on the other side saying, hey, there's a new guy. My recovery depends on helping that guy get sober. So what changed? How come in AA, after a few years, any lengths is on my terms, and not maybe someone else's terms, God terms, or maybe my sponsor's terms? What changed? Because I got this thing called a re-emergence of ego. I become prey for comfortability, and trouble starts to happen. And I have experienced some of that in AA. And here's the other one. Well, I'm sober so long, therefore I can get away with doing this, fill in the blank. And then it becomes really painful by doing stuff like that. And then I know I'm in trouble. So I do this. I'm never going to do that again because I'm sober this long, I shouldn't be behaving this way. And then I find myself right back at it again. So I offer you this. How many times have we experienced the strange mental blank spots in AA sober and in other areas of my life? Swearing that I'm never going to do something, and then I'm right back at it, wondering how did it happen? Whether it be a fear spree or an anger spree, a sex spree, a food spree, whatever it is, here I am again. And how did this happen? And I come out on the other end and say, what was that about? And I have a truckload of amends to make now. I say all this for one reason, because I had been separated from the power again. And instead of integrating with the power and continuing to grow with it, and you see, that's what this work does. The spirit, sometimes I'll say the spirit is sick, but what I really mean is the spirit doesn't get sick. God doesn't get sick, I become sick. I get blocked. I start to get untreated in here, in my heart. And what a lot of this work does is there is this wedge between me and the power. And it's the kind that just, and it kind of just gets ripped out. And once it's taken out with the stuff that I've learned in 4, 5, 6, 7, and then going to make amends in 8, then that stuff gets cleared out and I become integrated with this God again. I get free of what happens. But after cleaning up my amends, and I mean all the amends that I'm consciously aware of, not just the ones that are convenient for me to work, because that's again the reemergence of the ego. It's just sheer ignorance on my arrogance on my part that I'm running the show again. If I have a list of people that I'm aware of, I better be going knocking on doors. I know how to work step 8, and I know how to knock on a door and go and make an amends in step 9. And I know how to work step 3. I put pen to paper, I work step 4, and it's that simple. But I need to be doing this stuff and not tell me myself, because self is what's going to get me in trouble. Not self telling me, you know what, you've been doing this so well, it's okay to kick back now. I need to continue after doing my amends to grow in understanding and effectiveness and experience new experience with this God. I go to meetings and I hear people talking about God and ask them if they had gone through the steps, or if they belong to some religion or something, or are they talking about God like they had an experience with it, that they had done, and they had done none of it. And I thought of my own experiences, and it's been this. I can believe in God, but having an experience with God is two different neighborhoods. I can believe in God, but having an experience with God is two different neighborhoods. Like I believe planes fly, but I don't know how to fly a plane. I don't have experience flying them. So believing in God, and while I say God works in my life, and okay, I see God working in your life, but I have no experience with that power. So I need to have an experience with this power. And if I have experience with this book, I can tell you from my heart that you will have an experience with the God of your understanding. You will have an experience with this book, and you will have an experience with your God of understanding. We don't need to find God a year sober. One of the things I hear a lot of is, get a sponsor, someone with a year or more sobriety. And I sit back and I say, what does this mean? Ebby, he showed up at Bill's door with what, 2 months sober, and got right with something. He had gotten right with something and he knew he had to pass it on to Bill. And Bill was drinking, and Bill looked to get Ebby drunk, and Ebby didn't say, hey, I can't touch him because he's drinking. He's one of those wet ones. I gotta leave him alone. I'll just go get a nice upstanding drunk, and work with him. Ebby showed up in that sordid spot, Bill's living room, and went to work. And he took this power. I've got a drunk I need to fix, and I want to pass it on. Bill did not get sober right away, but the seed was planted. And lots of times when we're sponsoring people and they get drunk, I'll think, hey, it's my fault, but it isn't. I just need to know that the seed was planted. And the same thing when I go to a meeting and I ruffle a lot of feathers passing this message on in the book, people, I don't know, I've seen them get up and walk out, or they'll start to yawn or mumble under their breath, and that's fine, because some of those people, when they are dying, who are real alcoholics, come back and say, hey man, can you take me through this book? Because I need to get to God. And that's what I'm responsible for. I've heard too many stories, my own story. I would come to AA in the early days, get lots of suggestions from people who meant well, right? But maybe they weren't the real type like I am. And they'd say, don't drink and go to meetings, put the plug in the jug, make 90 and 90. Meeting makers make it. there's lots of sobriety, there's lots of sobriety in the coffee pot, all that stuff. And so this is what they told me to do. And I tried to do this on my own and my own will until I would slip. And then I asked that man to help me do the steps. He was armed with the facts, gave me the information, walked me through this book, and somewhere God happened. And in that spiritual appendix, page 559, I think, it talks about spiritual awakening and spiritual experience. And it explains the difference between the two, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, the educational variety, which a lot of us have. But I'll tell you from my own experience, when God shows up, God shows up. God shows up whether it's slow or quick. And I'm going through this work and waiting for the burning bush to show up. And sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. My experience has been this. There's the fifth step promises talking about walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And we're on the broad highway and fears fall from us. We feel the nearness of our creator. That stuff happened to me. Not on my time schedule, not on my terms, but on God's. It happened. And I'm sure a lot of you can identify with this. You're going about your business and suddenly, there's God. And you can just feel it. And I mean, any word that I could put to this would fall short. I think silence makes more sense when I'm trying to explain God. But I remember telling my sponsor about this experience, and the words were falling short. How can I tell you about the love and power of my God without falling short? Well, I'll do my best. I've been able to sponsor a lot of people, broken people, with nothing and wondering what their life was going to turn into next. And you sit down with the person and the light in their eyes is out. You can see it. And then you sit with them and you walk them through doctor's opinion and you walk them through the first few chapters and they find their truth. And they see that the power, the solution is in step 2. Step 1 tells them their problem is drinking. And that they're through. And now you really pull the bottom out of me, but step 2 is a solution. And they tell me how to get to that place. I don't believe like you believe. And the book is really clear in the chapter to the agnostic. I wish I could believe as that man believes. But a spirit of willingness is all this takes. A mustard seed of it. A spiritual experience begins with just a drop of willingness. That's all it takes to blow the doors wide open, and my own conception of God, no matter how inadequate, was sufficient to make that approach. I don't need to believe like the guy who has made right with God for a long time. God does not make hard terms with those who seek him. And this book is really clear on that. You'll hear in AA, I'm living on life's terms. Well, I blew that one. I failed. I still don't know how to live on life's terms. It's too difficult, too painful, and it's always wrapped up with self. But life on God's terms, it's simple. It's easy. I suit up and I show up and I go to meetings and I go home to be a husband to my wife, Lori, and a father to my kids, and to be a son to my mom and a brother to my sister, Anne. And I try to be the most upstanding member of AA, and I fall short in every area. But God doesn't make too hard terms because I set right the wrongs that I make. Chapter 2, the agnostic. If you have this dilemma with this God stuff, you sit down with this book in chapter 4 and I've heard people in AA say, I read the book so many times, cover to cover. And I sit back and ask the question, what's your experience with this book? We read it like we read the newspaper. Some of us cover to cover. I read it cover to cover. Like that qualifies me to be a member of AA because I read it from front to back. Big deal. I don't go into the back of the book much except for Dr. Bob's story. You know, if I want to read a drunkalog, I can go hear one at a speaker meeting. I need solution because I lack power. And if I think being here 14 years suddenly that I am the power, I'm in trouble. If I then wake up one morning that I have choice, I am in serious trouble. That was removed from me. What this work allows me to do is access this power. The third step promises talk about principal, agent, director, father, child, employer, employee. Like a loving father, God is going to nurture me, and like any father would do with their son or daughter. And when we make mistakes, they're going to hold them in their arms and show them the right way to go, not to punish, not banish them. An agent and a principal. My sponsor explained it. A principal has the power, and the agent goes out and represents the principal. And page 68 in our book talks about that God will demonstrate through us what he can do. That's an awful lot of responsibility and a whole lot of power. I mean, you realize what that says in there. God will demonstrate through you and through you and through you what he can do. Now, I'm a drunk walking in the door with absolutely nothing. All I can think of was the next drink and my life is in the toilet. And then I wake up. And then we come to page 68 and it says that God will demonstrate through me, Norm Shahat, what he can do. I am in the world to play the role he assigns. This is great information for someone who has been dying of alcoholism and guess what? No one is not qualified to do this. God doesn't make too hard terms. It's roomy, all inclusive, never exclusive. We don't check you at the door. No one got checked before coming into this meeting today. Your ID, please. You know, um, when I walked into AA in my home group, no one said, well, you don't look right. You're too short, you're too tall or too short. They just said, welcome. Because this place is sacred. And I never want to forget that when I'm in a room full of alcoholics called AA, that it's a sacred place. And the chapter to the agnostics, one of the most powerful chapters for me personally, was what it has done for me and continues to do for me. Step one brought me to a place of being willing to do anything. And getting step one, dying of untreated alcoholism, my life was falling apart. It was falling apart. 2 failed marriages, fired 7 times, homeless, sleeping on wood pallets downtown. My family was destroyed by this thing called alcoholism. I watched my mom die at the hands of this, and I grew up to become an alcoholic. And after circumstances brought me to a place of willing to do anything, our book talks about when working with someone, that lucid interval. There was a lucid interval where I was at the bitter end and there was some thing in me that opened up. And I know that that was God, just opening up my heart. And I began to work with a sponsor and I learned that step one was the problem and step two was the solution to this whole thing. That a God of my understanding was going to bring me to a place, this power greater than myself of a solution, sanity, wholeness of mind. And at the beginning, the power, it was a group of drunks, right? It was good, orderly direction. And I found power in the unity of this fellowship. I found the power in the numbers. I would go to meeting after meeting, listening to people, and I would sit with those old timers, like sit right in the middle of them or behind them or next to them. And and so that thinking, that some of that stuff would rub off on me. and I would just get it that way. Just anything. I made a decision in 3 to get that power. What brought me to that decision? Step 1 brought me there. We often hear in AA, go back to the previous step. Nonsense. What's that going to do? What's changed? Go back to step 1, where you had no reservations, where I was willing to go to any lengths. What changed? Well, I have problem making some amends, and the sponsor says go back to 8. I mean, that's not going to work. What's 8 going to do? What's changed is when I showed up knocking on the door. Hey, sponsor, in the early days, hey, sponsor, I'll do anything. I will make amends. I will go to Toronto to make amends if I have to. So what's changed? I go back to step 1. How come there are reservations again? How come there are conditions on my sobriety? Isn't this God's deal? It was like that when I started, so I make a decision in 3. I turn my will and my life over to God of my understanding. I clean house in 4, and I share it with someone else in 5. And I did it. And I did it with other men, one after another. I'm almost done. And in this discipline, there is freedom. I did more 5th steps over the year, and it got me freer. The great thing about 6 and 7, when I get here, I'm feeling empty, and I got to get to God. I'm feeling empty, and I got to get to God. So what do? Well, I reach out there to fill up, get the right spouse, I get the right job, the right body, the right car. I'm always reaching out to fill up. And some of us develop that weird disorders over that. But what I really need to do is empty out in order to be full. Get rid of all the things that are blocking me from this power. I showed up with a spirit of willingness, willing to have God take from me whatever he thinks is necessary from me. Step 7 is not so much about on my terms. It has very little to do with me. It's about how to be of service to God and other people. And great things start to happen. Page 75 says deep and effective spiritual experiences and the sense of being reborn, a new person living in the spirit of the sunlight.